The night air was heavy with city smoke and neon lights, a restless hum of engines and voices echoing through the streets. Julia Robinson stood at the bus stop, her shoulders slouched with exhaustion after a 10-hour shift at the diner. Her dark brown skin glistened faintly under the flickering streetlight, and her curly hair was pulled back tightly, the way she always wore it to keep customers from making comments. She held a few coins in her palm, barely enough for the ride home, and clutched her worn purse close to her chest. The bus finally screeched to a stop. Julia stepped inside, dropped the coins into the fare box, and moved toward the back seat. Her body ached, her feet sore from hours of standing, yet her mind stayed sharp. She had learned long ago that a black woman moving through the city late at night had to keep her guard up. She had just closed her eyes when the driver's irritated voice snapped her back. "No money, no ride," he barked toward the door. Julia turned. A tall man stood hesitating at the entrance. His clothes wrinkled, his face pale under the fluorescent lights. He looked out of place, too clean-cut to be homeless, too unsettled to be drunk. "I was robbed," the man said, voice low but firm. "They took everything, my wallet, my phone, even my car. I just need to get home." The driver crossed his arms. "Yeah, I've heard that one before. Step aside." Passengers shifted uncomfortably, but no one moved to help. Julia felt her chest tighten. She had been in situations like this, turned away, disbelieved, dismissed because of her skin. She recognized the shame in the man's eyes, the desperation of being stripped down to nothing. Before she could second-guess herself, Julia stood up. "I'll pay for him." The bus fell silent. Dozens of eyes, some curious, some skeptical, landed on her. Julia ignored them, marched to the front and slid her last coins into the box. The driver narrowed his eyes. "You sure about that?" "Yes," she said firmly. Her voice carried a weight that came from years of fighting to be heard. The man blinked, startled. Their eyes met for the first time hers, dark and steady, his blue and filled with disbelief. He hesitated, almost ashamed, then stepped onto the bus. "You don't have to," he began. "I already did." Julia cut him off. "Better sit down before he changes his mind." A few passengers muttered under their breath. Julia caught the word charity tossed like an insult. She had heard worse. She returned to her seat, jaw tight, refusing to show any sign of weakness. The man sat a few rows ahead, stealing quiet glances over his shoulder. Julia noticed the way his hands trembled slightly as he pressed them against his knees. Whoever he wasn't used to being helpless. As the bus rumbled down the avenue, Julia stared out the window, her reflection framed by streaks of neon. She told herself it meant nothing, just another night, another act of kindness no one would remember. Still, she couldn't ignore the way the man had looked at her, like he hadn't expected anyone, least of all, a stranger, to stand up for him. When the bus reached her stop, Julia rose, smoothed her diner uniform, and walked toward the door. Behind her, the man's voice called out, hesitant but sincere. "Thank you. You have no idea how much you helped me tonight." Julia gave him a small smile. Everyone needs a little help sometimes. Then she stepped off the bus into the night air, her figure swallowed by shadows and streetlights. She didn't look back, but he did. The man, William Stone, though no one on that bus knew his name, remained frozen in his seat watching her disappear. For the first time in years, he felt something shift inside him. He had built his life on wealth, power, and control. Yet tonight, with nothing left but the clothes on his back, it was a black woman he had never met who gave him dignity when the world turned its back. And William Stone knew he would not forget her. The bus rattled away, leaving Julia in the glow of a flickering street lamp. She walked quickly down the cracked sidewalk toward the small neighborhood where she and her mother lived. Her shoes, scuffed and worn, slapped softly against the pavement. Around her, voices rose from porches, music spilled from open windows, and a group of teenagers laughed too loudly at the corner store. It was familiar, imperfect, but it was hers. When she pushed open the door of their modest home, the scent of collard greens still lingered in the kitchen. Her mother, Evelyn, sat at the table with a sewing kit spread before her, mending an old blouse. She looked up with a tired smile. "You're late," Evelyn said, her voice raspy from years of long hours and little rest. Julia shrugged. The diner was busy. Her mother studied her for a moment. "And you gave away your bus fare again, didn't you?" Julia froze, then smirked faintly. You always know. I know because you're me, Evelyn replied. Too stubborn to watch someone suffer even when you don't have enough yourself. Julia didn't answer. She sat down at the table, resting her chin on her hand. The truth was, the coin she had handed over tonight had been her last. Tomorrow she'd have to scrape together change from under couch cushions or walk to the diner. But she refused to regret it. Meanwhile, across the city, William Stone was climbing the marble steps of a glass tower that pierced the skyline. The doorman, startled to see him arrive on foot, with no phone, no car, and no security detail, immediately let him in. William muttered something about a bad day before disappearing into the penthouse. He dropped into the leather sofa, staring at the walls of glass that framed the glittering city. The silence pressed down on him heavier than the weight of his father's empire. He was used to control, to staff waiting for his calls, drivers at his disposal, and endless money flowing through his hands. Tonight, stripped of it all, he had been forced to rely on a stranger whose skin carried the burden of a world he had never bothered to see. William loosened his tie, rubbing a hand over his face. Her voice still echoed in his ears, firm, unflinching. Everyone needs a little help sometimes. She hadn't looked at him with pity, nor with admiration. She had looked at him as if he were simply human. It unsettled him. Back in Julia's neighborhood, Evelyn poured 2 mugs of weak tea and slid one toward her daughter. You look like you've seen a ghost. Julia let out a soft laugh. Not a ghost, just someone different. He was this white guy on the bus, said he got robbed. Driver wouldn't let him on. She hesitated. I paid for his fare. Her mother raised an eyebrow. And he thanked you like you saved his life, didn't he? Julia nodded slowly. Evelyn's smile was tinged with warning. Be careful, baby. Folks like that live in a world we don't get invited into. You help them once they remember you for a night. But by morning they're gone and you're left here still counting coins. Julia looked down at her tea, the steam fogging her vision. She wanted to believe tonight had meant something, that her small gesture had left an imprint. But her mother's words carried the bitter weight of truth. Across town, William couldn't sleep. He stood at the massive window, watching headlights crawl across the highway below. His penthouse felt colder than usual, its silence more suffocating. For the first time in years, he wondered if his wealth had built walls so high that he had forgotten what life looked like outside them. He thought of Julia, her dark skin glowing under the harsh lights of the bus, her voice steady, her presence commanding even in a worn diner uniform. She had given him more than a ride home. She had given him perspective. And William Stone, heir to Stone Hotels, knew with absolute certainty that he had to see her again. The diner's bell jingled as Julia pushed open the door, the morning sun cutting sharp angles through the glass. The scent of frying bacon and cheap coffee clung to the air. A jukebox in the corner sputtered out a soul tune almost drowned by the clatter of plates and the bark of impatient customers. Julia tied her apron tight around her waist and stepped behind the counter. Her dark skin glistened under the fluorescent lights, her curls pinned back neatly, her uniform freshly washed but faded at the seams. She had barely clocked in before the insults started. "Hey, sweetheart," a white man at the counter drawled, his voice dripping with condescension. "Don't burn the toast this time. You people never get it right." Julia froze for a second, then forced a polite smile. She'd heard worse. She had learned to swallow the sting to keep her voice even, no matter how sharp their words cut. "Yes, sir," she replied evenly, grabbing the order pad. From the booth by the window, a group of regulars smirked and whispered their laughter a dull blade. Julia ignored them, moving swiftly between tables, her body a rhythm of service learned through necessity. The bell chimed again. She looked up and froze. William Stone stood in the doorway, dressed simply in jeans and a gray shirt. No suit, no tie, no trace of the empire he came from. Yet his presence filled the room. He scanned the diner until his eyes landed on her. Julia's chest tightened. She hadn't expected to see him again. He walked toward the counter, slipping onto a stool. A few heads turned, some curious, some suspicious. His pale face stood out in the mostly working-class crowd, but he carried himself with ease as if he belonged anywhere he chose. "Morning," he said, voice warm, steady. Julia narrowed her eyes. "You again?" William smiled faintly. "I came to settle my debt. Coffee, please, and whatever else you recommend." Her hands hesitated over the pot. She couldn't decide if his presence irritated or intrigued her. Finally, she poured the coffee, setting the cup down with a sharp clink. It was nothing, she muttered. "To you, maybe," he said, lifting the cup. "To me, it was everything." Julia arched an eyebrow. "You look like you can afford your own bus fare now." He chuckled softly. "Yeah, today I came prepared." At the other end of the counter, one of the regulars sneered, "Look at that! White boy slumming it up with the help." The words sliced the air. Julia's knuckles tightened around the coffee pot. She knew the man wasn't just mocking William. He was mocking her, reducing her to the help, a body in a uniform, nothing more. Before she could speak, William turned his gaze toward the man, calm but firm. "She's not the help. She's the one keeping this place running while you sit there complaining." The regular shifted uncomfortably, muttering something under his breath. The tension thinned, but Julia's pulse still hammered. She wasn't used to anyone stepping in. Most times, people pretended not to hear. She poured William another cup, her voice low. "You shouldn't have done that." "Why not?" "Because people don't like it when you call out their ugliness, especially not for someone like me." He studied her face, the quiet strength etched into every line. "Then maybe they need to be uncomfortable." Julia didn't answer. Instead, she walked away to take another order, her mind spinning. She had survived this long by blending in, by letting insults slide off her back. William, with his easy confidence and pale skin, could afford to challenge people. She couldn't. Yet a part of her, one she had buried deep, felt a flicker of gratitude. Later, when the lunch rush slowed, William remained at the counter stirring sugar into his coffee. He watched Julia move with practiced grace, her dark skin glowing under the harsh lights, her presence commanding even in silence. Finally, she returned to him, crossing her arms. "Why are you really here?" He hesitated, choosing his words. "Because I wanted to see you again." Julia raised an eyebrow. "You don't know me." "I know enough," he replied softly. "You didn't look at me like I was above you. You just helped. That doesn't happen in my world." Her lips tightened. "Maybe that's because in your world people like me aren't even seen." The truth hung between them like smoke. William didn't deny it. He simply nodded, as if acknowledging a truth he'd ignored for too long. The bell over the door rang again, pulling Julia back to work. She grabbed her order pad, but before she walked away, she looked at him once more. "You better enjoy that coffee. It's the only debt I'll let you pay." William smiled faintly, lifting the cup in a silent toast. And for the first time in years, Julia felt something unexpected stir inside her curiosity. The diner buzzed with the hum of conversation forks clinking against chipped plates, the jukebox humming faintly in the corner. Outside, the sun dipped low, painting the city in shades of amber and rust. Julia leaned against the counter, arms folded, watching William sip his second cup of coffee. He looked oddly comfortable here, as though the cracked vinyl stools and buzzing fluorescent lights suited him more than the luxury world he clearly came from. But Julia wasn't fooled. Men like him didn't wander into diners in working-class neighborhoods without reason. So she said, finally, narrowing her eyes, "Why keep coming back? You could buy coffee in half the city's hotels, probably own half the places, too." William smirked faintly. "And yet this coffee tastes better." Julia rolled her eyes. "Flattery won't get you free refills." He leaned closer across the counter, his blue eyes steady. "Maybe I just like the company." Julia froze for a second, caught off guard. His tone was calm, not the slick charm she'd grown used to from customers who thought a black waitress was fair game for their jokes. His words felt real, and that made her uneasy. "You don't even know me," she muttered, turning to wipe down the counter. "Then tell me," he said. She looked at him sharply. "Most people didn't ask. Most didn't care." Julia hesitated, then shrugged. "What's there to tell? I work. I study at night. I help my mom keep the lights on. That's it." His brow furrowed. "Study business administration," she said, her voice softening as she spoke the words. "I want to open my own bakery someday. Something small. A place that feels like home." William's lips curved into a faint smile. "That doesn't sound small." That sounds like a dream. Julia laughed bitterly. Dreams are expensive. People like me don't get the luxury of chasing them. He tilted his head. What do you mean? Her voice hardened. I mean that when you're a black woman, people expect you to serve coffee, not own the shop. They expect you to take orders, not give them. Every time I talk about opening a bakery, someone smirks like I just told a joke. William didn't flinch. He just looked at her steady, as if he was hearing the weight of her words instead of brushing them aside. That's not right, he said quietly. Julia gave him a look. Welcome to my world. Silence settled between them, filled only by the hiss of the coffee machine. William stirred his cup slowly, his gaze distant. I've never had to think about that, he admitted. The doors I walk through, they're just open. No one questions if I belong. Julia raised an eyebrow. Privilege looks good on you. He didn't smile. He nodded. I guess it's something I've taken for granted. Julia studied him, surprised by his honesty. Most men she'd met denied it, brushed it off, or laughed it away, but William seemed unsettled, as if he were only now realizing the shape of his own world. Why are you telling me this? She asked. He looked up, meeting her gaze. Because you helped me see it. That night on the bus, you didn't care who I was. You didn't ask what I owned. You just saw a man who needed help, and I can't stop thinking about that. Julia's chest tightened. She wanted to push him away, to remind herself that men like him never stayed, never understood. But something in his eyes, an earnestness she hadn't expected, made her pause. Before she could respond, the bell above the door jingled and a new group of customers filed in, breaking the moment. Julia straightened, slipping her mask of professionalism back on. William watched her move through the diner, quick and graceful, carrying trays with ease, deflecting rude comments with quiet strength. He could see now what she had meant. People didn't look at her and see an owner, a leader, a dreamer. They saw only what they wanted to see. But William Stone saw something else. When her shift finally ended, Julia untied her apron and grabbed her coat. William was waiting outside under the glow of the street lamp. You don't give up easily, do you? She said, pulling her coat tighter. Not when something matters, he replied. Julia laughed softly, shaking her head. And what exactly do I matter to you? He hesitated, then spoke carefully. Maybe you're the first person who's ever treated me like I wasn't made of money. And maybe I don't want that feeling to end. Her eyes softened despite herself. For a moment she considered the possibility that he wasn't just another man passing through her world. But Julia Robinson had lived too long in a city that measured her worth by the color of her skin. She wasn't ready to believe, not yet. Good night, William, she said, turning toward the bus stop. As the bus pulled up, she glanced back one last time. He was still there watching her, his face lit by the cold glow of the streetlight. And though she told herself not to, Julia wondered if he would be there tomorrow too. Julia balanced a tray of steaming plates as she wove between tables. It was another endless shift at the diner, the kind that blurred one day into the next. Her smile was practiced, her patience stretched thin, but her steps never faltered. She had long ago learned how to survive under fluorescent lights and condescending eyes. William had been coming in every morning now, sometimes just for coffee, sometimes lingering long enough to share small conversations. He was careful, almost gentle with his words, but Julia could feel an invisible line between them. She didn't know if it was class race or something else entirely, but it was there, stretching taut. That evening, as Julia walked home from the bus stop, she paused on the corner when she spotted something unusual. A sleek black car idled by the curb, its polished surface catching the glow of the streetlights. She didn't think much of it until she saw who stepped out. William. But this wasn't the same man who sat at her counter sipping coffee like any other customer. This William was dressed in a tailored suit, his posture sharper, his voice steady as he spoke to a man in a dark overcoat. The stranger handed him a folder, thick with documents. William nodded, his expression cool and confident. Julia stood frozen, half hidden in the shadows. The sight twisted her stomach. This wasn't a man robbed and stranded on a bus route. This wasn't a man trying to escape privilege. This was someone who belonged to a different world entirely, one she'd never been allowed to touch. When William finally noticed her across the street, his expression shifted surprise, then guilt. He lifted a hand as if to wave her over, but Julia turned sharply and kept walking. Her pulse thundered in her ears. By the time she reached her doorstep, anger had replaced shock. She had trusted him, even in small ways, and now she realized he had been hiding something all along. The next morning, the diner felt heavier than usual. Julia brewed coffee in silence, her movements sharper, her smile gone. When William walked in, the bell over the door ringing softly, she didn't even glance up. "Good morning," he said carefully, sliding onto a stool. She set his coffee down hard enough to rattle the spoon. "Morning." He studied her face, the tightness in her jaw, the guarded eyes. "You saw me last night." Julia crossed her arms. "Who exactly are you, William?" He exhaled slowly, the truth heavy on his tongue. "My name is William Stone. My family owns Stone Hotels." Julia blinked. The name was familiar, printed on billboards splashed across glossy magazines attached to the tallest glass towers in the city, a brand synonymous with wealth, luxury, power. "You own Stone Hotels," she repeated, her voice flat. "I help run it," he corrected, though the word felt thin. "I didn't tell you because I didn't want that to be the first thing you knew about me." Julia let out a sharp laugh. "You thought I'd treat you differently? You thought I'd start bowing down because you've got money?" "Newsflash, William. I get treated differently every day. Not for being rich, for being black." Her words cut deeper than he expected. He opened his mouth, but she raised a hand to stop him. "You walk into a room and doors open. People nod respect you before you say a word. I walk into a room and people wonder if I belong there. That's the difference." The silence that followed was brutal. William looked down at his coffee, the steam curling between them like a fragile wall. For the first time, he had no defense. Julia leaned closer, her voice steady but low. "You want me to believe you're different? Then stop hiding. Stop pretending you understand my world when you've never had to live it." Her shift ended in tense silence. When Julia walked out of the diner that night, William was waiting by his car. She paused on the sidewalk, crossing her arms. "Are you following me now?" He smiled faintly, though his eyes betrayed unease. "No, just hoping you'd let me explain." Julia raised an eyebrow. "Explain what?" "That you're a millionaire slumming it for fun, that you wanted to see how the other half lives." His jaw tightened. "No, I wanted to be seen without all of that. Just as a man." Her laugh was bitter sharp. "Must be nice to choose when you get seen." "I don't get that choice, William. People see me as black before they see me as anything else. That's my reality. And you hiding your last name doesn't change that." For a moment, neither of them spoke. The sound of passing cars filled the air, headlights flashing across their faces. Finally, Julia stepped back. "Go home to your world, William, because mine isn't a place you can visit when you're bored." She turned and walked away, her shadow stretching long under the street lamps. And for the first time in his carefully scripted life, William Stone felt powerless, not against money, not against rivals, but against the truth of a woman who refused to be fooled. The next morning at the diner, Julia's movements were precise, almost mechanical. She poured coffee, scribbled orders, carried trays, yet her mind was far from the tables. Her chest still burned with the image of William stepping out of that sleek car in his expensive suit, the mask of simplicity ripped away. The bell over the door jingled. She didn't have to look up to know it was him. She felt it like the shift of air before a storm. William slid onto his usual stool at the counter. For a long moment he didn't speak. He watched her move the set of her shoulders, the coolness in her eyes. Finally, he said softly, "Julia." Her head snapped toward him. Don't say my name like it belongs in your mouth." The words landed sharp as glass. William exhaled, steadying himself. "You're angry. You have every right to be." "I'm not angry," she shot back. "I'm done being fooled." He leaned forward, lowering his voice so the customers couldn't hear. "I never lied to you." Julia barked a laugh, bitter. "You let me believe you were just some guy trying to scrape by. Meanwhile, you're William Stone. People don't whisper about Stone Hotels, they scream it on billboards. You knew what your name meant." He held her gaze, blue eyes steady. "Yes, and that's why I didn't tell you. Because the moment people hear that name, they stop seeing me. They see money, power, influence, not a man, not me." Her chest tightened, but she refused to let the sympathy in. Do you know what it feels like when people stop seeing me because all they see is my skin, because they decide who I am before I open my mouth? That's my whole life, William. I don't get to hide from it. You do. Silence stretched between them. The hiss of the coffee machine and the scrape of forks on plates filled the air, but neither moved. Finally, William spoke again, his voice rougher. I wasn't hiding because I thought you couldn't handle the truth. I was hiding because I wanted one person, just one who looked at me without the weight of that name. And you did. Julia felt something stir inside her, something dangerous, a crack in the wall she had built, but she shut it down with a sharp breath. Your name is a shield, she said. It opens doors I'll never see. It makes people listen when I'd be ignored, and you think we're the same because you wanted to play poor for a night. He flinched, but didn't look away. No. We're not the same. And that's exactly why I need to understand your world. Julia shook her head, the bitterness in her chest tightening. You can't understand. You can walk away from your name. I can't walk away from my skin. The bell jingled again as new customers entered. Julia turned from him, her face a mask of composure as she took their orders. But inside, her pulse raced, every word she hadn't said pressing against her throat. William stayed a while longer, sipping his coffee in silence. When he finally stood to leave, he placed the money on the counter, his hand lingering. I don't want to lose this, he murmured. Julia met his gaze briefly, then looked away. Maybe you never had it. He walked out, the bell chiming behind him. For the rest of the day, Julia carried the weight of that name stone, heavy, gleaming, untouchable. She thought of how easily it had rolled off his tongue, how it had shaped his entire life before he was even born. And she wondered if someone like him could ever truly stand beside someone like her, without that name crushing them both. The television above the diner counter flickered with late-night news, the anchor's polished voice filling the room. Julia wiped down a table, her back stiff, when she heard the words, William Stone, heir to the Stone Hotel's empire, was seen last night attending an exclusive gala downtown. Rumors suggest he will soon take over as president following his father's retirement. Julia froze. On the screen, William appeared in a black tuxedo flanked by executives and reporters. Cameras flashed his name, spilling effortlessly from their lips as if it were currency. The man she had seen laughing over a chipped mug of coffee was nowhere to be found. This William was polished, powerful, unshakably confident a stranger. Her hands trembled around the rag she held. The customers around her watched the report with idle interest, unaware of the storm brewing in her chest. When the segment ended, Julia tore off her apron and walked out into the night air. She couldn't breathe inside those four walls. She walked quickly, the city lights blurring around her. Her mind replayed every word he had said to her in the diner. I just wanted to be seen without my name. Lies, she thought bitterly. All of it lies. Her phone buzzed in her pocket. A text from an old friend who had also seen the news girl. Tell me you're not mixed up with that William Stone. Men like him don't see women like us as equals. Don't fool yourself. The words dug deep, sharper than she wanted to admit. When Julia got home, her mother was waiting on the porch, her expression already knowing. You look like you're carrying the world. Julia sank into the chair beside her, burying her face in her hands. He lied to me. Evelyn's voice was calm but firm. Did he lie, or did he leave out the truth? Julia looked up, eyes blazing. What's the difference? He let me think he was someone else, and I believed him. Her mother studied her carefully. Maybe he was scared you'd see him the way everyone else does. Sometimes people hide because they want to be loved for who they are, not for what they carry. Julia shook her head. Or maybe he never thought I'd matter enough to tell the truth. Evelyn reached over, resting a hand on her daughter's. Baby, don't confuse his fear with your worth. Whether he's a millionaire or a janitor, you deserve honesty. If he can't give you that, then he doesn't deserve you. Julia bit her lip, fighting the sting of tears. Across town, William stood in his penthouse office, staring out at the glittering skyline. The gala had left him hollow, the applause ringing in his ears like chains. He had worn the suit, shaken the hands, played the role, but every smile felt like a lie. And the only person who had ever seen him as more than the Stone legacy had walked away. His assistant had asked him earlier why he seemed distracted, but he couldn't explain it. How could he tell anyone that a young black woman in a faded uniform had become the most real part of his world? William poured himself a drink, but didn't touch it. He thought of Julia's words in the diner. "You can walk away from your name. I can't walk away from my skin." The truth burned. She was right. For the first time in his life, William realized that all the money in the world couldn't buy the one thing he wanted most, her trust. The days that followed were heavy with silence. Julia avoided the places she thought he might appear. At the diner, she focused on her work, refusing to let her coworkers see the turmoil in her chest. But every time the doorbell jingled, her heart clenched, half expecting to see him standing there. At night, she replayed everything, his laugh, his quiet questions, the way he had defended her when others mocked her. For a moment, she had believed he was different. But how could she trust a man who lived two lives, one in the shadows of a bus stop, the other on the front page of society magazines? And William, though surrounded by luxury, felt more alone than ever. He sent Julia a dozen unsent messages, typed and erased again and again. In every version, the words felt inadequate. Because what could he say to bridge a divide built not just from lies, but from centuries of difference, privilege, and pain? One evening, Julia sat on her porch steps, the crickets chirping softly in the warm night air. She hugged her knees to her chest, staring at the sky. She wanted to hate him, to shut the door and never look back. But beneath her anger, something fragile still lingered, the memory of a man stripped of everything, standing helpless on a bus, and the way he had looked at her when she offered help, like she was the only light in the room. Julia's chest tightened. She hated herself for still wanting to believe in that look. The kettle whistled in the small kitchen, steam rising into the air as Evelyn Robinson poured hot water over a tea bag. Julia sat at the table, her hands wrapped around an empty mug, her eyes fixed on a crack in the linoleum floor. She hadn't spoken much since walking home from work. Her mother set the steaming cup in front of her. "Drink. You look like you're carrying stones in your chest." Julia managed a faint smile at the choice of words, but it quickly faded. "He lied to me, Mama. Or maybe he just didn't trust me enough to tell the truth. I don't know which is worse." Evelyn sat across from her, her weathered hands folding together. "Start from the beginning." So Julia did. She told her mother about the night on the bus, the mornings at the diner, the quiet conversations that had felt more real than anything in years. And then she described the moment she saw him in the suit, stepping out of the black car with his last name blazing like a crown. Evelyn listened without interruption, her dark eyes steady. When Julia finally ran out of words, she let the silence hang before speaking. "You know what I hear," Evelyn said softly. "I hear a man trying to step out of the world he was born into, but too scared to show you both sides of himself." Julia frowned. "But if he really wanted me to know him, wouldn't he have been honest from the start?" Her mother leaned forward. "Baby honesty isn't easy when you've been raised to wear masks. That boy grew up in a world where appearances were everything. Maybe he didn't hide his name to deceive you. Maybe he hid it because he wanted you to see the person under all that weight." Julia stared at her tea steam curling against her cheek. "But what if I can't trust him now? What if I'm just another curiosity to him, something different to play with before he goes back to his world?" Evelyn's voice grew firmer. "Julia, don't confuse his privilege with his heart. Yes, he's white. Yes, he's rich. Those things will always be there. But the question you need to ask yourself is simple. When he looks at you, does he see a woman worth standing beside? Or does he see a story to collect and then discard?" Julia's throat tightened. "I don't know." "Then find out," her mother said, her tone sharp now. "Don't run because you're scared. You've faced worse than a rich man's secrets. If he's real, if he's willing to fight for you, you'll see it. And if he's not, then you walk away with your head high, knowing it wasn't your failure. It was his." For a long time, Julia sat in silence, letting the words sink in. Evelyn reached across the table, covering her daughter's hand with her own. "Baby, I spent half my life letting men decide if I was worthy. Don't you dare repeat my mistakes. You know your worth. Don't let his last name blind you to it." Julia swallowed hard, her eyes stinging. What if he can't carry the weight of who I am, of what this world does to me? Evelyn gave her a long, knowing look. Then he'll break, and you'll still be standing, because you've carried that weight your whole life. Later that night, Julia lay awake staring at the ceiling, her mother's words circling in her mind. She thought of William's eyes on the bus, lost, stripped human. She thought of the way he had defended her in the diner when others mocked her. She thought of the name Stone, heavy, immovable, crushing. Maybe her mother was right. Maybe the only way to know the truth was to let him show it. But deep down, Julia feared what she might discover. Not that William didn't care, but that even if he did, the world they lived in would never let them stand together without trying to tear them apart. She turned on her side, pulling the blanket tight around her shoulders. Outside the city hummed indifferent. And somewhere in a penthouse across town, William Stone sat awake too, staring at the skyline, wondering if there was a way to bridge the distance between the world he was born into and the woman he couldn't forget. The boardroom was silent, the air thick with the scent of leather chairs and polished oak. William sat across from his father, Richard Stone, whose silver hair gleamed under the chandelier. The old man's gaze was sharp, cutting through his son with the weight of decades spent building an empire. "You embarrassed us last night," Richard said coldly, tapping the table with a manicured finger. "Leaving the gala early, walking out. When investors had questions, what were you thinking?" William leaned back, unflinching. "I was thinking I don't want this life anymore." The room fell still. One of the senior executives shifted uncomfortably. Richard's eyes narrowed. "Don't be dramatic. You're the heir to Stone Hotels. You don't get to want something else." William's jaw tightened. "I do. I'm done living a script written before I was even born." His father laughed bitterly. "And what will you do? Run off and play house with some girl from a diner?" The words struck like a blade. William's fists clenched under the table. "Her name is Julia, and she's the first person who's ever seen me as a man instead of a stone." Richard's face hardened. "So this is about her. This is about me," William shot back. "But yes, she opened my eyes. I can't keep pretending this life is enough when it never was." The older man leaned forward, his voice low, dangerous. "You throw this away, you throw me away. You'll walk out of here with nothing." William met his father's stare steady and unyielding. "Then I'll walk out with nothing. Because for the first time in my life, that sounds like freedom." He stood sliding his chair back with a scrape that echoed in the cavernous room. For a moment no one moved. Then Richard's voice rang out cold as stone. "If you walk out that door, don't come back." William paused at the threshold, his chest heavy, but his steps sure. "Goodbye, Father." And then he left the weight of the family name crashing behind him like a door finally slammed shut. That same evening, Julia finished her shift at the diner, exhaustion pulling at her bones. The streets were quiet, the neon signs buzzing faintly in the humid night. She turned the corner toward her bus stop and froze. William was standing there. No suit, no polished shoes, just jeans and a plain shirt. But his eyes, clear, resolute, were different. Julia's arms folded instinctively across her chest. "What are you doing here?" He took a slow breath. "I quit." Her brows knitted. "Quit what Stone Hotels?" "My father. All of it." "I walked away." Julia stared at him, disbelief flickering across her face. "You expect me to believe you gave up billions of dollars because of me?" "No," he said firmly. "I gave it up because of me. Because for the first time I want to build a life that's mine, not one handed to me by a name. But, yes, you showed me that was possible." Julia's throat tightened, but she masked it with a sharp laugh. "That's easy to say now, but what happens when reality hits? When the world looks at you and me together and decides I'm not worthy of your freedom?" William stepped closer, his voice steady. "Then let them look. Let them whisper. I don't care. I'm not walking away." Her heart raced, but fear still clawed at her chest. "You don't know what it's like, William. To be doubted, dismissed, treated as less because of the color of your skin. That doesn't vanish because you love me." He held her gaze unshaken. "Then teach me. Show me. I can't change what I was born into, but I can choose how I live now, and I choose you." The city buzzed faintly around them. Distant cars, a siren wailing laughter spilling from a bar down the street. For a long moment, Julia stood silent, the weight of his words pressing against every scar life had carved into her. Finally, she whispered almost to herself, "You don't know what you're asking for." William reached out gently, taking her hand. His voice was low but sure. "I'm asking for a chance. With you." Julia stared at their hands, his pale against her dark two worlds, colliding under the streetlight's glow. Part of her wanted to pull away to protect herself from the heartbreak she feared was inevitable. But another part, the part that had seen something human in him that night on the bus, longed to believe. And for the first time, she didn't let go. The rain fell in steady sheets, turning the city sidewalks into rivers of reflected neon. Julia sat inside the small cafe near the park, her hands wrapped around a steaming cup she barely sipped. She had agreed to meet him against her better judgment. Every instinct told her to guard her heart, but her mother's words echoed in her mind. "Don't confuse his privilege with your worth. Let him show you who he is." The bell above the cafe door jingled. William stepped in damp from the rain, his hair plastered to his forehead. He looked different now, not the polished air she had seen on television, but not the lost man from the bus either. Something steadier lived in his posture, a quiet certainty. He spotted her immediately and crossed the room. "Julia." Her chest tightened at the sound of her name. She gestured to the seat across from her. "Sit." He obeyed his blue eyes, never leaving hers. Silence stretched until Julia finally spoke. "Why am I here, William? Why did you want to see me?" His voice was quiet, but unwavering. "Because I need you to know I didn't lie to you. I hid my last name, yes, but everything I felt, everything I said to you was real." Julia's gaze hardened. "You don't understand. It's not just about lies. It's about trust. You get to decide when you reveal your truth. I don't. My skin walks into every room before I do. That's my reality." William leaned forward, his expression raw. "Then let me carry that reality with you. I can't erase it. I can't pretend I know how it feels. But I can stand beside you in it, if you'll let me." Her throat tightened. She wanted to laugh to dismiss him, but something in his tone, earnest, stripped of arrogance, disarmed her. "Why me?" she whispered. "You could have anyone. Someone your family would actually accept. Someone who fits." His lips curved into the faintest of smiles. "Because when you looked at me that night on the bus, you didn't see stone hotels. You didn't see a millionaire. You saw a man who needed help, and you helped. No one in my world has ever done that without expecting something in return. Except you." Julia's chest ached. She wanted to believe him, but fear clawed at her ribs. And what happens when your world collides with mine? When your family looks at me and sees someone unworthy? When the whispers turn into headlines? William's jaw tightened. "Then let them. I already walked away from them once. I'll do it again." The words hit her like a jolt. She studied him carefully, searching for cracks for insincerity. But all she saw was a man stripped of the armor his name had once given him. Her voice softened despite herself. "You don't know how hard it will be." "I don't," he admitted. "But I know it's worth it. You're worth it." For a long moment they simply stared at each other, the storm outside pounding against the glass. Julia's fingers trembled around her mug. Finally, she set it down and whispered, "I want to try. But you need to understand, if you ever hide from me again, it's over." Relief washed over his face, and he nodded without hesitation. "No more masks. No more secrets. I promise." Julia exhaled the tension in her chest, loosening just enough to let something fragile slip through hope. They left the cafe together, the rain easing into a drizzle. As they walked, William held an umbrella above them, but Julia noticed how close he stayed, as if he were shielding her from more than just the weather. At the bus stop, she paused. "This is me." William tilted his head, studying her. "Can I give you a ride home?" Julia hesitated, then smiled faintly. "Only if you don't try to make it a debt to repay." He grinned. "No debts, just company." They rode in silence, the city lights glowing on wet pavement. Julia stared out the window, her reflection merging with the blur of neon. For the first time in weeks, the knot in her chest began to loosen. When they reached her block, she turned to him. "Thank you." "For what?" "For not giving up." His eyes softened. "I couldn't, even if I tried." She stepped out of the car, the rain cool on her skin. For a moment, she stood on the curb watching him through the window, and though fear still lingered, she felt the faintest spark of something new, a second chance. The coastal air was different, cleaner, lighter, carrying the salt of the sea and the cries of gulls overhead. Julia stood on the weathered steps of an old mansion that looked out over the shoreline, its paint peeling, its windows cracked, but still proud. The property had once belonged to a wealthy family, abandoned now to the elements. To her, it was a ruin. To William, it was a beginning. He handed her a rolled-up blueprint, his eyes bright with energy she had never seen in him before. "This is where we start." Julia unrolled the paper, the ink smudged from the sea breeze. Her bakery, her dream was sketched right there on the first floor of the planned boutique hotel. A small cafe space with wide windows overlooking the ocean shelves of pastries, a counter carved from dark wood. It was everything she had imagined, and more. Her throat tightened. "William, this is too much." He shook his head. "It's exactly enough. You wanted a bakery. I wanted a place that felt real, not just another monument to money. This is ours." She wanted to argue, to remind him of the risks, of the way the world might sneer at a black woman standing beside a white millionaire and calling herself his partner. But as she looked at the lines on the paper, she couldn't stop her fingers from tracing the outline of the cafe. For the first time, her dream felt like something she could hold. The weeks that followed blurred with work. Julia split her time between shifts at the diner and late nights, reviewing menus, tasting recipes, and helping select materials for the renovation. William handled contractors and architects, but he always circled back to her, asking what she thought, what she wanted. "Your vision comes first," he said one evening as they sat surrounded by samples of tiles and fabric swatches. "This bakery has to feel like you." Julia laughed softly. "You're terrible at picking curtains. You know that." William grinned. "I'm learning to trust the expert." But the deeper they threw themselves into the project, the louder the whispers around them grew. Contractors exchanged glances when Julia gave instructions. A supplier made a careless joke about diversity hires. Even some of William's old associates warned him quietly that investing his fortune in a vanity project with a diner girl would destroy his reputation. Julia felt the sting of every word, though she tried to hide it. One night as they left the construction site, she finally spoke what had been pressing against her chest. "They don't believe in me, William. They see me as the weak link, and maybe they're right. What do I know about running a bakery inside a hotel, about standing beside you in a world that doesn't want me there?" He stopped walking, turning to face her. Rain misted softly against his hair, catching the glow of the street lamp. "Julia, listen to me. None of this works without you. None of it means anything without you. If they can't see your worth, that's their blindness, not your failure." Her eyes burned, though she refused to let the tears fall. "But what if I fail? What if I prove them right?" William's voice softened. "Then we fail together. But I don't believe for a second that you will." For a long moment they stood there in the rain, two figures bound by something neither fully understood, but both unwilling to let go. Inside the mansion, the renovation began to take shape. Walls were stripped beams, reinforced rooms filled with light again. Julia spent hours in the half-finished kitchen, testing recipes with borrowed equipment. Cinnamon rolls, sweetbreads, lemon pies, the air filled with scents that reminded her of her mother's kitchen, but with her own mark of ambition. William stopped by one evening, taking a bite of her still-warm pastry. His eyes widened. "Julia, this is it. This is your signature." She smirked, brushing flour from her hands. "Don't flatter me. I'm not," he insisted. "This what you create, it's better than any luxury dessert I've ever had. This is what people will come for." And for the first time, Julia believed him. But not everyone was convinced. When William announced the project to the press, headlines twisted the story: Heir trades fortune for infatuation with waitress. Stone Hotel's descendant risks, legacy on girlfriend's bakery dream. Julia's stomach turned as she read the articles. Her picture snapped outside the diner and her uniform was splashed across one of them. The comments section was worse words dripping with racism and contempt. That night she sat on the porch of their temporary apartment staring at the waves. William found her there, the phone still in her hand. "Don't read it," he said softly. Her voice cracked. "They don't see me as anything but a joke. A black waitress playing dress-up in your world." He knelt beside her, taking her hands. "Then we show them. Not with words, not with press releases. With this place. With every plate of food you put on a table. With every guest who feels what we're building." Julia searched his eyes, desperate for certainty. For the first time she saw no hesitation, no mask, just belief. And as the waves crashed against the shore, Julia made herself a promise she would not let the world decide her worth. The bakery kitchen smelled of sugar and yeast, a comforting chaos of rising dough and simmering fruit. Julia wiped flour from her cheek, humming softly as she arranged pastries on a tray. For once, she allowed herself to imagine it, the cafe filled with customers' laughter, spilling through the windows, the sweet smell of her work becoming something more than a dream. Her phone buzzed on the counter. She almost ignored it until she saw the name, Eric. Her breath caught. She hadn't seen the name in years, but it was burned into her memory like a scar. With a shaking hand, she answered, "What do you want?" A low chuckle filled the line. "Julia, it's been a long time." Her stomach tightened. Eric's voice carried the same arrogant edge it always had, a reminder of nights spent with promises that turned to ash. He had never believed in her bakery dreams, laughing at the idea that a black girl could run her own shop in this city. His words had once broken her confidence. Now hearing them again felt like a knife reopening an old wound. "I don't know how you got my number," she said coldly, "but don't call me again." "Relax," Eric said smoothly. "I just wanted to see how you're doing. I heard you're starting something new. With him." Her grip on the phone tightened. "Stay out of my life." But his laughter followed her, even after she hung up. That night, Julia sat on the porch, arms wrapped around herself. William stepped outside, concern etched across his face. "What's wrong?" he asked gently. She shook her head. "Nothing." "Julia." His voice was firm. She hesitated, then sighed. "It was Eric. My ex." William's jaw tightened. What did he want? "Nothing important. Just reminding me of everything I don't want to remember." William sat beside her, his hand brushing against hers. "Does he know where you are?" Her throat tightened. "I don't think so." But even hearing his voice, it brought everything back. The way he made me doubt myself. The way he said, "No one would ever take me seriously because of who I am." William's face darkened, his voice low. "If he comes near you, he'll regret it." Julia shook her head. "That's not what I need, William. I don't need you to fight my battles for me. I need you to understand how heavy it feels to always prove yourself twice over. To prove you're not just some poor black girl with a dream that's too big." William turned toward her, his eyes softening. "Julia, you don't have to prove that to me. I already know who you are, stronger than anyone I've ever met. If the world can't see it, then let's build something so undeniable they can't ignore you anymore." Her chest tightened. She wanted to believe him. But she knew Eric wouldn't be the last ghost from her past or her present to challenge what she was trying to build. Days later, the project site buzzed with noise hammers, drills, the hum of workers transforming the mansion into something alive again. Julia arrived with fresh pastries for the crew. Some accepted them gratefully. Others smirked, making offhand comments about Stone's charity project. She kept her chin high, but the words dug deep. Later, as she arranged her baking supplies, she overheard two men whispering, "She's not even qualified. Just a waitress. Stone's blinded by her. This won't last." Her hands clenched until her nails pressed into her palms. She wanted to scream to demand they see her for what she was building, but instead she walked past them with her head held high, her silence sharper than any retort. William noticed the tension in her shoulders that evening. "What happened?" "Nothing," she muttered. Then after a pause, "Just more people waiting for me to fail." He reached for her hand, steady and warm. "Then let's make sure you don't." That night, Eric's shadow returned again, not in person, but in Julia's mind. She dreamed of him standing in her bakery laughing as her trays of pastries burned, telling her she was foolish to think she belonged. She woke in a sweat, her chest heaving, the echoes of his voice still ringing in her ears. She slipped quietly out of bed and into the unfinished kitchen of the mansion. Under the glow of a single bulb, she began to bake, measuring, mixing, kneading, until her hands ached and her fear dissolved into dough. When the sun rose, William found her surrounded by trays of golden bread and sugared rolls. Flour dusted her hair and skin, but her eyes burned with determination. "Julia," he whispered, awe in his voice. She looked at him, her lips trembling but firm. "I won't let them decide who I am. Not Eric, not your father, not anyone." William stepped closer, cupping her flour-streaked cheek. "That's the woman I fell in love with." For the first time since Eric's call, Julia felt the fear loosen its grip. The ghosts of her past might haunt her, but she would not let them dictate her future. And with William beside her, she realized she didn't have to face them alone. The Stone family estate was a fortress of wealth. Marble floors, vaulted ceilings, portraits of ancestors who had built empires from concrete and glass. William walked through the cavernous hall, his footsteps echoing his chest heavy. He had agreed to this meeting not because he wanted to, but because Julia deserved more than whispered threats from the shadows of his family. His father, Richard Stone, waited in the grand study, a glass of scotch in hand. The older man didn't rise when William entered. Instead, he gestured toward the empty chair across from him. "Sit," Richard ordered. William remained standing. "Say what you need to say." Richard's lips curled into a thin smile. "Then I'll be direct. End this. Whatever you think you have with that girl, it ends now." William's jaw tightened. "Her name is Julia." Richard waved a dismissive hand. "Julia, Jessica. It doesn't matter. She's not one of us. She doesn't belong in our world." "She belongs in mine," William said firmly. His father leaned forward, his voice sharp. "You're throwing away a legacy for a fantasy. Do you know what people are saying? That you've lost your mind, blinded by some waitress who thinks she can play house with a stone." Anger surged in William's chest, but he held it steady. "She's not a fantasy. She's real. She's stronger than anyone you've ever respected. And she doesn't want my money. She wants her dream." Richard's eyes narrowed. "And you think the world will let a black woman stand beside you without tearing her down, without tearing you down?" William's voice dropped calm but cutting. "The world already tried, and I'm still here. So is she." Richard stood now, his glass slamming onto the table. "You are blind, boy. You don't see what this will cost. You'll lose investors, influence the respect of this city. Do you think they will follow you when you stand next to her? They won't. They'll destroy you." William stepped closer, his eyes blazing. "Then let them. Because if the price of your empire is denying the woman I love, it was never worth having." For the first time, Richard faltered, caught off guard by the steel in his son's voice. But his expression hardened again, pride refusing to yield. "You'll regret this." William straightened his resolve, unshakable. "Maybe, but I'll never regret choosing her." Outside, the night air felt heavy charged. William exhaled, letting the storm of his father's words roll off his shoulders. For the first time, he felt lighter. When he reached the coastal mansion, he found Julia in the half-finished cafe, kneading dough by hand. Her sleeves were rolled up, her dark skin glistening under the warm light, her hair tied back in a scarf. She looked up when he entered, concern flickering in her eyes. "How did it go?" she asked carefully. William hesitated, then told her the truth. "He wants me to end this, to walk away from you. From us." Her chest tightened, but her face remained calm. "And what did you say?" He crossed the room, stopping just inches from her. "I told him no. I told him you're my choice, Julia. Always." For a long moment she searched his eyes, looking for cracks for hesitation. Instead, she found something steady, something immovable. Slowly, Julia set the dough aside and wiped her hands. "Do you understand what that means, William? That you've just painted a target on both of us? People won't let this go quietly." "I know," he said, "but I'd rather fight with you than live safe without you." Her breath caught. No man had ever said words like that to her, not without condition, not without fear. Julia stepped closer, resting her forehead against his chest. "Then we fight. Together." William wrapped his arms around her, pulling her close. The sound of the ocean outside their window was steady, unyielding a rhythm that matched their resolve, and for the first time Julia believed they could withstand whatever storm came next. The day of the grand opening dawned with the sea painted gold. Sunlight spilled over the newly restored mansion, no longer a hollow ruin, but a beacon rising from the cliffs. Fresh paint gleamed against the old stone glass windows, sparkled, and the air smelled of salt, mixed with coffee and fresh bread. Julia stood at the entrance in her crisp white apron, her hands trembling despite the steady smile she tried to hold. Inside, her bakery shone. Wooden tables polished smooth shelves stacked with pastries, baskets of warm rolls filling the air with cinnamon and butter. She had dreamed of this space since she was a girl, sketching menus in the margins of her notebooks. Now it was real. William approached from behind, adjusting the cuffs of his simple linen shirt. Not a suit, not a tuxedo, just a man stripped of pretense. He placed a hand gently on her shoulder. "You ready?" he asked. Julia exhaled slowly. "As I'll ever be." The first guests arrived just after noon, locals from the town, curious travelers, even a handful of skeptical journalists. Julia greeted them all, her heart hammering as the bakery filled with voices. She moved behind the counter, sliding plates of lemon pie and steaming mugs of coffee across to customers. The first bite changed everything. "This is divine," one woman murmured, her eyes wide. "I've never tasted bread like this," said another. Julia's lips curved into a smile she couldn't suppress. For the first time, she wasn't just serving food, she was sharing herself. Every loaf, every pastry, every recipe was proof she belonged here. But outside, whispers still lingered. A pair of reporters muttered to each other as they scribbled notes. "Stone's empire collapses into a vanity project. A millionaire throwing away everything for a black waitress." Julia overheard her chest tightening. She wanted to ignore it, but years of hearing her worth dismissed by strangers made the words sting deeper. William noticed. He crossed the room, standing beside her at the counter. His voice was calm but loud enough for the whispers to hear. "She's not a waitress. She's the owner. And this," he gestured around them, "is only the beginning." The reporters glanced at each other, caught off guard by the quiet force in his tone. They scribbled again, but Julia no longer cared what they wrote. William's words had cut through the noise, steady and true. By evening, the bakery was buzzing. Children licked frosting from their fingers. Couples lingered over coffee, and the dining room filled with laughter. Julia's mother, Evelyn, sat proudly at a corner table, watching her daughter move with grace and authority. When Julia finally had a moment to breathe, she sank into the chair across from her mother. Evelyn reached for her hand, her eyes shining. "You did it, baby," she whispered. Julia swallowed, hard tears stinging her eyes. "We did it, Mama." Evelyn squeezed her hand. "No, you did it. They tried to tell you you didn't belong, and look at you now." Julia looked around the room, her bakery alive with light and warmth. For the first time in her life, she didn't feel like she was surviving. She was thriving. Later that night, when the last guests had left, Julia stepped outside with William. The moon hung high silver light spilling across the waves. She leaned against the railing, her apron still dusted with flour, her dark skin glowing under the soft night sky. "I never thought I'd see this day," she admitted. William smiled. "I did. From the first time you told me about your bakery, I knew you'd get here. I just didn't know I'd be lucky enough to be part of it." Julia turned to him, studying the man who had walked away from a fortune to stand beside her. "They'll never stop talking, you know. Some will never accept me. Us." He stepped closer, brushing a strand of hair from her face. "Then let them talk. While they whisper, we'll build something they can't ignore." Julia's lips curved into a soft smile. A new legacy. His eyes locked onto hers. Ours. The ocean roared in the background, steady and unyielding, as Julia leaned into him. For the first time, the weight of the world felt lighter, not because it had disappeared, but because she no longer carried it alone. The coastal town gathered at dusk, drawn by curiosity and whispers of the new hotel and bakery. The lights from the restored mansion glowed like lanterns against the darkening sky, and the smell of fresh bread drifted through the salty breeze. Inside, Julia moved confidently among the guests, her apron gone replaced by a simple but elegant dress. Tonight, she wasn't a waitress or even just a baker. Tonight, she was an owner. William watched from across the room, pride softening his features. He had stood in countless ballrooms, surrounded by the city's elite. But this moment, this modest celebration filled with laughter, coffee, and the hum of community felt more real than any gala he had ever endured. But outside the glow of the chandeliers, shadows lingered. Not everyone had come to celebrate. A few skeptics muttered at the edges, their words dripping with doubt. She'll never last. He threw away everything for her. Stone's empire reduced to a bakery sideshow. Julia heard them. She always did. But this time she didn't shrink. She stood taller, her dark skin radiant under the lights, her voice carrying steady as she greeted every guest with the poise of someone who knew exactly where she belonged. Later in the evening, William stepped to the center of the room and raised his glass. The chatter quieted, all eyes turning to him. "I've stood in many rooms like this." He began, his voice calm but sure. Rooms filled with wealth, power, and influence. But none of those places ever gave me what I found here. He looked at Julia, his gaze unwavering. Here I found honesty, strength. A woman who taught me that love isn't about names or legacies, it's about truth, about building something real together. The crowd murmured, some smiling, some shifting uncomfortably. William didn't care. His eyes never left Julia's. "I walked away from an empire," he continued, "but what I gained is worth more than all of it combined." "Julia, you didn't just change my life, you gave me a reason to live it fully. And tonight I want to ask you something." Gasps rippled through the room as William dropped to one knee. From his pocket he pulled a small velvet box. Julia's breath caught her heart hammering in her chest. "From the moment you handed a stranger your last coins on a bus, you've shown me the kind of love that can't be bought. You've faced the world's cruelty and never let it break you. Julia Robinson, will you marry me?" The room fell silent, the only sound the crash of waves outside. Tears blurred Julia's vision, but her voice was steady. "Yes." Applause erupted. Some clapped warmly, others hesitated, still wrapped in prejudice, but none of it mattered. Julia stepped forward, her dark hand sliding into his pale one, the two of them a living defiance of every barrier the world tried to place between them. Their wedding was held weeks later, not in a ballroom, but on the beach. The sand was soft beneath their feet, the ocean a witness to vows spoken under an open sky. Julia wore a gown simple yet breathtaking, her curls free, her skin glowing like bronze in the fading light. William stood waiting at the altar, his suit plain, his smile brighter than the sun. Evelyn wept quietly in the front row, pride radiating from her like fire. Guests from the town filled the rows behind her, their applause rising with the sound of the waves. When Julia and William exchanged vows, there was no talk of wealth or legacies, only promises. "I will stand with you through every doubt, every whisper, every storm," Julia said, her voice breaking with emotion. "And I will choose you every day, no matter the cost." William replied, his hands trembling as he slid the ring onto her finger. When they kissed, the world around them erupted in applause and the crash of the sea. For that moment, it wasn't about money or race or names. It was about love, stubborn, defiant, and real. In the months that followed, the bakery thrived. Tourists came for the ocean view, but they stayed for Julia's lemon pies and cinnamon rolls. Locals filled the cafe each morning, the scent of coffee and fresh bread becoming the heartbeat of the town. William worked beside her, no longer the heir to stone hotels, but a man content to sweep floors, serve tables, and build something from the ground up. Every day they defied expectations. Every day they proved that love was stronger than prejudice. And when people whispered about his name, about her skin, they no longer flinched. They stood taller together. Because Julia and William had built more than a hotel, they had built a legacy of their own, a legacy of love beyond barriers.